Alamosa and Monte Vista. Monte Vista refuges are not able to join us, but I'm thinking about this women in public land leadership. It's pretty unique. I would think that all of the public land management agencies in this area are led by women. So kind of a neat opportunity to get this perspective. I'm Martha Williamson. I'm the Divide District Ranger on the Rio. That's the middle part of the Rio. And I am coming up on 8 years in position. So how we have this sort of sorted out, this is going to be like very informal. And I'm going to at least start by playing the alphabet card with my last name, which works out well for me sometimes. So we have a handful of questions that we're all going to take turns answering. And then if it gets into a like discussion, or if there are questions that come up along the way, please do ask. It's lovely to have such a small group that we can all sort of like chime in without needing to be too terribly formal about this. So take turns answering the questions, and we'll, as Hannah said, do have question and answer kind of block of time at the end. So with that, the first question, which I think usually gets a lot of interest, and this is a great time for anybody who's curious to ask more questions, is what was your pathway into your current position? And so how about Pam, do you want to go first?
Sure. I was debating how far back to go, but I'll just say that I got a degree, a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries and science, and somewhere I missed the memo that you have to work many seasons as a seasonal to get on permanent with the National Park Service. And so when, of course, I didn't get a permanent position, I decided to go to grad school and ended up at University of Alaska Fairbanks and got a master's in environmental education and interpretation. While I was in school, I worked for a state wildlife refuge, and following that, I was able to get on permanently with the Bureau of Land Management and managed a visitor center in Coldfoot, Alaska, on the Dalton Highway, which is halfway between Fairbanks and Prudhoe Bay. And I did that for about 3.5 years. And then I actually left the government for about 7 years. I worked overseas for a while, went back to school again. And in 2007, I got married, and I knew I was going to be in Fairbanks for a while at that point. And because it had become home, that was home base through school and being overseas. And so I was bored in my job. So I started looking back to my first career, and ended up finding out that the National Park Service needed someone to help with a big exhibits project. And so I came on actually as a term to begin with for a couple of years, and worked on writing all the panels and overseeing this big exhibit project. And then my boss retired and I got his job. And so for the next 5 years, I was chief of interpretation for Gates of the Arctic National Park, Yukon-Charlie Rivers National Preserve, and an interagency visitor center in Fairbanks. And then from there, I left Alaska and we moved to Washington, D.C. I did a 2-year fellowship called the Bevenetto Fellowship. And the first year I got to spend on detail to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So I actually worked as a staffer on the Hill and got to know things from their angle. And then the second year was split between legislative affairs and working on the director's hallway on special projects. And following that, I landed at Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, which is based out of Page, Arizona. It's where Lake Powell is. And I was assistant superintendent for external affairs. And then after that, I landed here. And I had a couple acting superintendent positions in there along the way at Kenai Fjords and Capitol Reef. But that was kind of my path to where I am today. So, are we taking questions now, or are we all going to give the overview and then open up for questions?
How about overview, then questions? Although if anybody who's tuned in would like to do that differently, that's great. I feel like that's all right. How about Tristram? How about you?
So my pathway into my current position, I've I have over 33 years now with the agency. I grew up on a small cow-calf operation west of Fort Collins and was always super keen on birds, plants, animals, livestock. I had hopes and dreams of becoming a vet, but my grades in college just didn't quite support that. And my family did have a grazing allotment on the National Forest. So, I kind of had that. So I thought, well, I'll go into range ecology. So I got a degree in range management, range ecology at Colorado State University. My first job was with the NRCS out in Fort Morgan, Colorado. And after a summer out on the prairie, I decided that wasn't for me. Although I've come to appreciate the prairies now, and then was able to get into what was called the co-op program and was up in Montana for a couple of years doing that, fulfilling my school and working. And then we were able to move down to Saguache, Colorado in 1992. So I've been here for a while, and I got a job in rangeland management. So I did that for about 11 years. And then I worked on the Divide Ranger District for about 13 years, doing the rangeland, public lands grazing. And then I decided that I needed to branch out a little bit. And then I did a couple acting details as a ranger. And then I was selected for the permanent ranger position in Saguache.
Thanks, Tristan. How about you, Andrea?
Yeah, and I apologize. I believe my husband is coming home right now. My dog is going to start barking. So if that happens, I'm sorry. But so I'm going to start with my dad. So my dad is a career Forest Service employee. And he, ever since I was a little girl, just got me really interested in the outdoors and took me hunting and fishing and all that kind of thing. So I would say that was probably my first real introduction, a lifelong one, into the Forest Service. But as far as my personal story, so I started college in engineering, and then I sort of had self-reflection and switched over to wildlife management. So I wanted to do what my dad did. It took me a couple years to realize that. So I switched to wildlife management. I got a bachelor's degree in wildlife management and then a master's degree in range and watershed management. And actually, while I was in college, I also got to participate in the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities program, and I got to work on a national forest for a summer. So that was great. And then while I was in college, I also worked for the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit and the Cooperative Extension Service. So just got some different experiences doing different things, mostly related to wildlife. My first job with the Forest Service was as a range management specialist. And even with a master's degree, just to get my foot in the door, I came in as a GS5 level. It was a 579. But just sort of, putting that out there, because a lot of times people just sort of expect that a certain degree or something will qualify them to come in at a certain level. And sometimes it's about kind of getting your foot in the door. So did that for about 3 years. And then I got a job here on Caneos Peak as the wildlife biologist for the district, and did that for a few years. And then our district ranger left, and I had an opportunity to start detailing into the ranger position. And then I actually, eventually when it came open, I applied for the district ranger position here, and I was successful in getting that. And I have been here ever since. So that's my story.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. It's kind of fun to, well, anyway, it's fun to come at the end to see just where the connection points are in between sort of different ones of the story. So I also wanted to be a vet, and went to college and was a chemistry major. So I have a degree in chemistry. And 2 summers in, totally on a whim, I went to a trail crew in Utah. I was in North Carolina. I went to a trail crew in Utah through the Student Conservation Association as a volunteer. I didn't really know where Utah was, but it sounded like a kind of a fun time. So ended up there on a trail crew and just loved it. And that sort of changed my career aspirations all the way. So ended up being on a trail crew for a while, being a wilderness ranger for a season, then worked as a fire ecology tech, and then as a hydrology tech for years. And then I had heard the memo that you didn't get a permanent job without working a whole bunch of seasons, but the memo finally, like I kind of caught up to what the memo was really saying, and ended up going back to school to get a degree in forestry, and that worked. I got picked up under the equivalent of the recent grads program on the kind of Humboldt-Toyabe doing fuels in title, but it was more being like a liaison between fire and the resource shop because they couldn't really talk to each other. And then moved over to the Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming in a shared position with Grand Teton Park, or as a kind of 50-50 interagency position in fire. While I was there, I did a detail as a ranger, a bit on accident. It wasn't really part of my plan, but it turned out that I thought that it was a total kick. I really enjoy people, and it is a people job through and through. So when this position on Divide opened up, I had worked for both the forest supervisor and then the gentleman who was the deputy at the time, and thought that I would enjoy working for them. So here I am, coming a handful of years later. So with that, we can either transition to the second question for everyone, or answer, at least sort of like open it up for questions on the career pathway, if anybody has any questions on that before we move on.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I better bring my camera up. So seriously, you guys have all similar but unique paths. It's kind of cool. And I guess my question is, does anybody feel like at this point in the game that you would have rather take a different path?
That's a fun question. And I'm just, what I'm going to is like, what are the couple of different places where I was very clear that there was a decision point that I went one way or another. And I think the first one that comes to mind was being offered a timber skep, or was like whatever, like a pathways position into timber on the San Juan in 2002 or 3, something like that. And then another one where it's like offered to go into the like the JAX program, the fire academy, like even like 2000 or something. And I sort of like look back, and I would have had my foot to Andrea's point, I would have had my foot in the door in a permanent position sooner. And I have zero regrets about it not having taken either of those paths as they opened. And just, maybe this is for what this is worth. My rationale at the time was not some like clear-headed, clear-eyed like vision of where my future was to go, but it was more like it didn't sit as the right decision for for the JAX one, is because there was like still like a month left of ski season, and I was committed to skiing a bunch, which is kind of a shallow reason to turn down a permanent job. And yet I think it like ultimately kept me on a path that made sense. So take that for what that's worth.
Greg, I'll answer your question. I think this was probably the right career for me. I do feel like it's very fulfilling, and it's definitely in line with my interests and my knowledge and all that kind of thing. Although occasionally I wonder if I should transition and become like a professional chef or something, because that's something else I really love. So
Andrea, that's kind of what I was going on is I would never suggest that we would have regrets, but there are sometimes I think, oh, maybe I would have rather taken a different path as well, Martha, the fire path, for instance. So that's why I asked, and we all have other interests, right, Andrea? You're a good cook, I hear, anyway, so if you were a chef, man, I'm coming over. Anybody else? Oh. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that. All right, so the next question is, what is your leadership philosophy and how did you develop it? And I wonder, maybe, oh, so I can go first to not abuse my last name's position in the alphabet. Thanks for laughing, Andrea. So I think my leadership philosophy is generally centered on that I see that the leader's role is to create the conditions in which the people we are leading can do their best work. And so that comes in, that manifests in a handful of different ways. That manifests in supporting people to get what they need, just sort of resources and training wise. It manifests in clearing obstacles out of the way. It manifests in, we had a long discussion at our leadership team meeting this morning, but it manifests in looking forward so that we can navigate a clear, smooth course to the best of our ability so that the people we are responsible for can do their best work. And I think that's another component of my leadership philosophy is that I see that leadership is almost synonymous with responsibility, and that it is like very much about being responsible for the care and well-being of the people in who we are leading. I developed it, I'm sure, I mean, who knows, like from my mom, probably, I don't know. I mean, it sort of like goes way back, I'm sure. And also a couple of people who have really like stuck with me along the way. I mean, I think a handful of people, including Steve LaRosa, Chief of Maintenance at Grand Teton National Park, who I credit with a lot of abilities to articulate sort of some leadership principles. And it's lovely to have his company in my head. And I think about him often in considering leadership sorts of ways. So with that, Tristram, how about you?
So my leadership philosophy is still evolving. I'm still trying to maybe figure out, what is a good fit. But, a common theme that I think we're going to hear throughout this is, I believe in people. I believe the best in people. And if you give them, like Martha said, the tools and, and clearing the obstacles, they will rise. They will do what is good for them and what is, best for them. And, they'll stay true to their North Star as long as we are staying true to our North Star. And how I developed it, I just think over the years when I first started in the agency, there were not a lot of women in the agency. And so that was kind of a unique circumstance. And I just remember that I will always treat people the way that I would like to be treated. And like Martha, I had some people along the way that really believed in me and still believe in me. So that's mine. I'm a work in progress.
I think we all are. Thanks, Tristram. How about you, Pam?
Sure. So when you sent this question, I was like, okay, what is my philosophy? I've been to a lot of leadership courses and different stuff, but I've never been to one who actually takes you through writing down and making your official philosophy. So I started thinking of how I lead. And one of my values with leading is transparency. When you are transparent and from how you spend your time to how you make decisions, sharing what you can and explaining if you can't share something goes a huge way to building trust and just building up the team, because you kind of have all cards on the table. So that's one thing that's real important to me. I also, I don't necessarily lead by consensus, but I try to have consensus with decisions as much as possible. And if we can't get there, I'm certainly willing to step up and make a decision when it's needed. But to have that discussion, make sure everybody feels heard, explain why you're making a decision if somebody disagrees, and to make sure, like I said, everyone feels heard. And then I like to have some kind of strategic planning document to guide day-to-day decisions as well as annual work plans, so that we're all going in the same direction, agree on the same priorities. What are the challenges, opportunities that we're going to focus on, and what are the steps to reach that end goal? So those were the things that came to mind for me. And how I developed it, I think one of you mentioned, I think part of it goes back, particularly to my father. When I was 16, he owned his own business. I worked for him during the summer, and I watched how he ran his business and interacted with his staff. And I know I learned a lot through that. And then over the years, just with people that I respected and that that I saw other people respect, I would pick up what I liked about them and would try to, as it fit me and my personality, I would try to incorporate that. And anyway, so I guess that's what I have.
Yeah, that's awesome, Pam. Thanks. How about you, Andrea?
Yeah, I would characterize my leadership philosophy, I guess, as servant leadership. I mean, that's something that's really important to me, is seeing where I can do something for the greater good. And I guess that's sort of how I developed it too, is, I guess in this life, I would like to sort of leave things maybe better than I found them, or have a long lasting effect for a lot of people. And I mean, multiple ways to do that, whether it be, encouraging employees to push themselves and develop themselves, or, sort of the land management that we do on the landscape, or whatever that looks like. But I think public land management obviously is a sort of great marriage of those things, being able to serve and then being able to have longevity in what you do, and maybe, what you leave when you're gone from this life. So
Yeah, that's neat. Thanks. It's neat to hear. It's neat to hear how we all approach the role and what we pull in. And I think the connection to the sort of like North Star values, and then also how we sort of have pulled those in, and what we pull from. Again, it's like trying to sort of integrate the pieces of other people who have helped us sort of form that vision is really neat to hear. Right. Next Tristram, question, maybe for Tristram first. Like, what is a leadership challenge that you faced, and how did you overcome it? Sort of take your pick, huh?
Okay. Well, there's multiple ones. I think one of the biggest leadership challenge across all of the agencies, whether it's federal, state, whatever, is just trying to, remaining personally and professionally resilient in the face of changing times, changing priorities, changing public use. A very specific example for me was the Decker fire in 2019. I was an agency administrator, and I definitely cut my teeth on some things that one needs to do to be successful as an agency administrator. And, definitely a learning experience, working with all of the different people. Excuse me. Excuse me. Just making making those decisions with all the people involved, that was the right treatment at the right time, letting fire, play its natural role and whatever. And I'm fairly risk averse, so that definitely stretched my personal and professional boundaries. But in the end, we had a good outcome. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tristram. Andrea.
yeah, one of the most difficult things I have faced in my career is helping employees sort of get through disappointments, in particular when you know, maybe they don't get a position that they were applying for or something like that. And I think my philosophy kind of goes back to Pam's on transparency and just, you know, being really honest with people about, you know, what we can share with them. And then also just trying to make sure that I'm doing my best as a supervisor to develop those people and give them as many opportunities as possible, so that maybe the next time, you know, they're more competitive or whatever that looks like. But, you know, it's interesting how, you know, other people's disappointments sometimes impact me more than even my own. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, no kidding. Thanks, Andrea. Pam.
The challenge that came to mind for me was when I arrived in July of 2018, there hadn't been a permanent superintendent there for almost 2 years because my predecessor was on detail for a long time, and then she got the job permanently. And then it took quite a while to get the replacement, to get me there. And so it had been almost 2 years. And between 2014 and 2019, our visitation doubled. And so most of that increased visitation happened between superintendents during that 2 years. And so when I landed on the ground, there were already congestion and safety issues raised back in a 2006 document and our general management plan in 2007. And so now we've doubled visitation, and the park had been able to make some good decisions and things to help address that. They added the second window on the entrance station. They started striping, you know, parking spots along the Dunes access road to maximize off-street parking. But nothing major had been done to get to a bigger solution. And so I got on the ground and realized we needed a lot more expertise on our team in order to look at the alternatives and make the best decision possible going forward. And so I got, you know, landscape architect and transportation planners and these folks from both our regional and national offices with these areas of expertise to come in and do basically have a workshop and look at the alternatives. And so we came up with what we think would be the best proposal to start building a project and doing planning, which you'll start hearing about in about 6 months or more. And so there's all these different then you had to figure out all these other steps of, okay, there's you know, trying to get the funding for hopefully one day additional parking and entrance stations and things like that. But along the way, we need to determine things like, well, what's our visitor capacity? We don't want to build parking lots that are too big and degrade the whole visitor experience. And so that's been all the steps we've been working on over the last several years. And so you'll find that in May and June of this year, we'll be doing visitor surveys and starting to collect that information of how visitors spend their time, what do they feel is too crowded, to help inform those decisions and further document, you know, planning documents and final proposals to go out to the public. And so anyway, that's the challenge that came to mind for me, that it was just this huge thing that needed to be addressed a couple of years earlier and getting the right people on the team.
Yeah, that's such a good one. I think just we're just coming off of our leadership team meeting today, and a couple of discussion points that we had. One was about the importance of like building out a team to address a problem that can represent a bunch of different perspectives. I mean, down the line of the diversity, equity, inclusion, but really like to solve the problem, you need a transportation planner and a landscape architect. You don't necessarily have all of the right perspectives and room. And then also just thinking about how many vacancies we have and how long they are before we're able to get them filled, and what it's like to how big a challenge can become in a short amount of time that then people come into. I would say, so it's like tongue in cheek, although this is actually a legitimate, one of the bigger leadership challenges I've faced was the day the coffee pot broke in the office, which sounds like not a big deal. And yet the coffee pot breaks. And this is the first time I had actually seen legitimate panic on two of the most steady people on the district, Kevin Duda and Lisa McClure, like steady Eddie all the time. And all of a sudden the coffee pot's broken and this is like panic inducing. So this is a bit to the point of like create the conditions in which your people can do their best work, like that equals coffee. And so sometimes the leadership challenge is not a very lofty one. It is like pretty foundational. Fortunately, at the time, there was a coffee cart and they had air pots. And so we got air pots and then the Walmart coffee pot solved less than 24 hours. So that was close. I think the like more real challenge that, I mean, we're in the thick of it lately is really what is walking the line between being realistic about our situation, whether it's budget, whether it's staffing, whether it's expected targets, like whatever that is, and while also remaining optimistic about our ability to make the best of those conditions. And I think that is, I think that's the job as I see it. And also it is a tough one to navigate. And how to overcome it is a daily question, maybe a weekly question, that for sure helps with, sort of input and insight and a whole lot of being carried by the good energy of the team I have the good fortune of being responsible for. So with that, before we go, so we have one more question for everybody, but I think that's like the two pieces of questions that we've all answered about what's our leadership philosophy and how we've come into it, and then what's the challenge and how do we address it. I'd love to open it up to any questions on those two before we close out and then can have a bigger discussion. All right. Well, with that, the last question is a little piece of wisdom to share, whether it's for the public who might have some questions about what's going on with public lands in general, or for people coming into the sort of public land management arena and interested in how to make a career of it. Andrea, do you want to go first?
Sure. So my piece of wisdom, I am gonna be in full disclosure here. It was the first time I heard it was from my dad, who came to talk at one of my college courses and advised all of us young college students to go to work for an agency whose values aligned with our own. And I think it's, really cool because we have a couple of different agencies right now on this call that have slightly different values. And I, have seen a lot of times where maybe people do go to work for an agency and their values don't quite mesh, and it's kind of a constant battle. And so I think when you are seeking out a career, especially in public lands management, because it takes a lot of heart to work in public lands management, you really just need to make sure that you are, in line with the general values of your agency. So that's the advice I'll pass on.
Nice, thanks, Andrea. Pam.
Sure. For people getting started, I would look for opportunities to get to know people that work for the agencies through internships, through volunteering, because that's really how I got both of my jobs. When I started my first job with BLM, the person who hired me was on my graduate committee. And so she had also seen my work that I had done as part of my graduate degree at the state refuge. And so she already knew my work. She knew me. And so I came into my first permanent job as a GS9, which is, I know, highly unusual. and then when I wanted to come back to the federal government, I touched base with people I still knew who worked for BLM, and they were like, oh, Park Service is looking for somebody for this big exhibit project. Well, the person there had been in grad school when I was in grad school. He was working on his PhD. I had helped him with his research project, helping to facilitate focus groups. And he was like, oh, I know you can write and you can handle the whole project. You can have the whole thing. So originally he was looking for someone to write all the text for all these exhibit panels. Then I ended up getting to manage the whole project. And it's all because of people I knew. And then, of course, that gave me the opportunity to prove myself. Of course, you have to follow through and prove yourself when you get to know people. But that when he retired, I got his job. I was able to compete and get that job. And so anyway, so that's, I guess, part of my advice. And then as you're working on your resume, get advice from people, share it, show it to people, ask them for feedback on it. And because government resumes are different than the private sector. And so that would be my other piece of advice.
Awesome. Thanks, Pam. Tristram?
So I have a little bit of advice for people just getting started, or, like college students that are, trying to work seasonally, whatever. This might sound a little bit flippant, but wear sunscreen. That's not my only one, though. I think it's really important that, students or, and people first getting started, I think they have this dream about what the job is, and it's riding horseback all day, or it's just hanging out in the woods, or, hiking to the high alpine lakes. And, really the job, it is about that, because, we are entrusted with taking care of our public lands, and it's everybody's public lands. But so much of what we do, it is about people. It is about our coworkers, our external stakeholders, the people that use and enjoy and sometimes abuse our public lands. And so if there's any opportunities to build your leadership skills in working with people, that will take you a long, long way. And if you have good people under you, that, there are the timber people and the range people and whatever, you don't need to know everything about everybody. So thank you.
Yeah, totally. I think that's very much the piece I have to share too, that it is really about the people. I mean, I do 0 land management and 100% people and relationship management, and that's great. I think that is as it should be. And I think the wisdom, or whatever it is that I have to share, is that it is worth every single second anybody puts into building and maintaining relationships, whether that's internal with our peers, whether it's with staff, whether it's with external counterparts, whether it's who knows, like it is everybody, like all of those relationships are how we are, I think, stronger together. And I think that is probably like the most valuable place to put time. So with that is the end of our prepared questions for the panel. And it would be fun to see what questions anybody else might have, or hear from Ramona, for example. Ramona, Katie, Hannah, Patrick, and Ariel, Anna, and Anne, like, what are your perspectives on this? I mean, I think we have a fun cast of characters from some different components who all intersect with public land management as women, except for Patrick, sorry, and Greg.
I'll go with that.
Yeah. What are you, Ramona?
I'm good, and you?
Good.
Good. To those of you that don't know me, I'm Ramona Weber. I'm a, I can't even think of commissioner. One of those things, that it's after 5 o'clock, my brain shut off. I'm a commissioner from Mineral County, and I'm also on Colorado County's public lands group. I'm the vice chair of that. So I have a lot of interest in public lands. And I will have to agree with Martha that relationships have been the key. to success, I think, more than anything. In working with counties all over the United States and working with people that deal with public lands on a one-to-one basis, some of the relationships that they have formed have not been good ones. I hear horror stories about people working with Forest Service BLM, and I count ourselves as some of the most blessed and lucky people in the world to have the relationships that we have, because it makes difficult situations easier. When we run into a problem, when we have 7 years of work on one project, those kind of things, if the relationships weren't there, they would be so much harder. And having that trust as a stakeholder and having that trust in the agencies that, we're kind of conditioned not to trust for a little bit. I mean, that's the hurdle we all have in any of our positions, is there's a hurdle there that you don't trust government in this or that. But in having those relationships, it takes those hurdles out of the way, and it opens the door to communication and allows us to work through the hard stuff in a much more cohesive, friendly manner. I mean, there's going to be hard stuff no matter what, but with that trust built there, and a trust of ownership, a trust of transmission, a trust of transparency, all those things, we have that built up. So when an issue comes up, we're not afraid to go and say, hey, as other leaders and women leaders and things like that, I think that's a key. Relationships are much, much more key and helps us get everything done. So thank you for doing this, by the way. I know there's some tough questions there, and I really appreciate hearing your answers and getting some insight.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ramona. It's fun. We're curious first. Any other questions first, and then I got a go back question for Ramona.
Uh-oh.
I know, right? Now you're in.
Yeah, I have a quick question for you all. This is Patrick Ortiz. Good to see you all. What's your favorite part about working and living in the San Luis Valley? And, maybe kind of a two-part question. What were your initial thoughts moving here? And how do you feel about it now, and kind of how that transition or lack of a transition happened for you?
I have to admit right now, with the wind we've been having the last few days, I remember before moving here, it's both my husband and I are like, we really don't like wind. We're like, we're going to a park that has sand dune in the name. It's going to be part of the experience. But anyway, what I mean, I really enjoy living in the San Luis Valley, and I'll be honest, it's as much for the forest as it is the park. We love to go disperse camping out on the forest. The dog can, hang off leash by ourselves, and we spend a lot of time hiking, four-wheeling, that kind of thing. And just have an amazing team of people at the park. And there's such a variety of stuff I get to work on. Everything from land acquisition to managing elk, reintroducing Rio Grande cutthroat trout, so the natural side, and then also trying to come up with creative solutions to keep our visitor experience positive and maintain it and keep it accessible to everybody. So anyway, that's what I have to say. I like it here. And the community is great.
I'll jump in here. So I had never been to the San Luis Valley, even though I grew up in Colorado. And I still remember that first big move from Montana with the dog and the new husband, the new baby, and coming up over Poncha Pass. And, you look out at that big, long expanse going down towards Villa Grove and all of that. And I looked at my husband, I'm like, what the hell have we done? It was a shock to me, just, kind of that deserty looking thing. But, you get into these communities, and, your kids are in school, and you become engaged with the communities, and, kids are in 4-H, you serve on some boards, and, you keep those relationships that, on the personal level, and they will tie over into your professional life. So, You know, I still like living here, even if it is blowing 45 and the dirt sideways. It will pass.
I'll go. So we started after I got married, we lived in Chama, New Mexico, and my husband manages a ranch, just a big ranch north of Chama. And so sort of out of convenience, I needed to transition and apply for a promotion that was still within commuting distance. So that's kind of how we ended up on this side of Cumbres and La Manga Pass, which we're barely on this side. So my husband still commutes to work in New Mexico every day. But that being said, once we moved here, I mean, of course, the land here is just gorgeous, and we are complete outdoors people. So it just suits us so well. And like Tristram, I raised my kids here now, and the communities and the people. And I mean, there are just a lot of really neat people here that are so tied to the land. I mean, they have such a strong connection to the land. And then, you know, I think about this a lot at even some of the water meetings. You know, we all have such commonalities, and we all have this affinity for the valley and the natural resources and for the people. So, I mean, it's like once you're here, it's really hard to leave.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't know I don't remember or know maybe from the get-go, like the story about the frogs, but whatever it is, like I got the frogs for sure. I'm completely enamored with the place. I don't.
It sounds like a Fred Bunch story.
Doesn't it? Oh, it might be. Yeah. I didn't 100% know what I was getting into here. I've been through here once when I was in working out of Durango. And I mean, moving here from Jackson, Wyoming, I feel like I got the best, like biggest upgrade in life experience imaginable. So.
I had a question for you guys. Maybe you can share a little bit of like, I guess kind of what's your wisdom on what keeps you like motivated and coming back and being excited about work when things get tough?
Thanks for your answers. That was awesome.
Honestly, the people. I mean, it's sort of like laughing last time I came back from some time off, and I was like, well, you know, I am here because I love you all. and that is why I showed up at work that day. There was a time when I was working out of Boise, Idaho, and I really didn't want to go to work, and I was trying to find like some fun way, like what am I going to do to make today going to work exciting? And I took public transportation, and I was the only sober person on the bus at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was a little clunky, so I did do that again. But all like joking aside, I mean, some days I think it is a good cause for being self-aware, and like some days it's no big deal and you're all fired up because there are all kinds of things to get fired up about, and some days it's a little bit of like, how can I trick myself into showing up, and in particular like showing up as I need to for the position that I'm in, because you know you gotta manage yourself, and it's, you know, whatever sort of a mood I'm in or whatever's going on, it's like I show up and it's not about me, it's about everybody who I am, again, like responsible for. And so sometimes it takes a little doing to get my head around that, but there it is.
I think it's remembering, you know, we had an acting deputy forest supervisor, and he would always say, you know, don't forget what your last name is, and it's service. And, you know, we've been entrusted with service to our people, to the publics, to the resources, and you do have to remember that. And, you know, we are all human, so we don't always have rainbow and sunshine kitty days, you know, but you have to show up for your people too. Or if you can't show up that day and, you know, be a positive, you know, take some space, take the day off or do something different.
That's one thing that I did learn from one of our previous deputy forest supervisors is sometimes in order to do the best for your people, you know, you can't really indulge the way that you're feeling all the time at that moment, right? You need to lead forward and help other people. And Also, you know, a lot of this job means having some tough skin and not taking everything personally. So those are just, you know, two ways that kind of tie into what Tristram and Martha just said about, you know, you have to show up as a leader and you know, maybe take some time later on when you're not with your folks to sort of work through what you're going through.
I'm curious for Ramona's perspective on that question too. I mean, I think you get it in a like quite a different way.
Way totally, and that is sometimes you have to show up as the leader. You don't like it, and you have to put everything else aside and that person. That's, you know, it's hard to live at the door, and especially
Well, shoot, you kind of cut out a little bit. That and now she's gone. Oh well, too bad.
I think
Oh,
I think the hardest thing for me is like in a small area, and we're all from small town or in small towns, is sometimes exactly your personal feelings are not what you have to act on, and they're completely different from what you have to make that decision that day. And in a small town, you know, you have those relationships outside of here, and sometimes you have to vote against people that you really like, and that makes it hard. Or, you know, you have to change those two things. I'm trying to get back on. I don't know what's happening here, but we're going to see here. Other than that, some days are hard, some days are great.
yeah, thanks for that, Ramona.
Back to meeting. I found it. I found the right button finally. Yay. I'm back. But
I'll jump in with a question. Kind of talked a lot about sort of creating relationships and how important they are and working with people. What is like, if you have like a one go-to trick for like, I don't know, starting out meeting someone to like begin building that relationship, or just like kind of maintaining a relationship, like are there go-to things that you personally do to keep those relationships and build them?
I can share something on that. And I guess I'm thinking in the term of potential constituents or partners of a park, and developing that relationship early on. And a lot of it is trying to find common ground where you can help them understand or help them know that you can relate and understand their viewpoint or where they're coming from. And the example, so when I was at Capitol Reef National Park, which is in southern Utah, I was there for 120 day, about 4-month detail. And one of my main jobs was to try to get out a draft grazing plan, which was very controversial. And so early on, I was, I think I was at a going away party for somebody. And I was first meeting county commissioners and other people in the community. And I was able to say, yeah, my husband's up in Alaska right now. He's fishing right now. He's going to hunt one last time. And then he's driving down our 4-wheeler down to where we normally live in Arizona. So immediately they knew I understood the viewpoint from hunting, from 4-wheeling and that type of recreation. And that I just it gave me enough of an in that they would at least give me a little bit of benefit of a doubt, you know, to start that relationship, rather than it immediately being you're so far in one direction, you won't understand grazing, you won't understand what where we're coming from with our concerns. And so that's the example that came to mind for me.
I guess for me, like, I mean, I mean, Ariel will laugh at this, but I think the part of it for me is just sort of a default to being like a kid again. And just like going up, I mean, like, hi is a great way to start building a relationship, and sort of, what are you all about? And I mean, not quite to like, will you play with me, but almost. And I think that's to the point of like finding common ground and just like reaching out and starting with hi, and then I think maintaining, just calling by like, just maintaining relationships by just calling to shoot the breeze. But I think, again, I think that there's real value in that, I mean, there's sort of, you can't spend hours and hours just doing that, because there's probably other things that need time too, but to not really have a whole, you know, not necessarily need to have an agenda. But I think it ties into what Pam's saying about like, you learn things, and then you have a place to start building on common ground.
Yeah, the timing of my husband's trip was perfect for that instance.
I would say, you know, just approaching everybody with respect and genuineness. I think people really can resonate with that. And then also, you know, a lot of times just trying to see other people's perspective or put yourself in their shoes. And, you know, Pam was thinking that when she was talking to those grazing permittees, right? So I think that's a really good way to just prepare for, okay, how do I engage these people? Or, you know, how are they going to really want to work with me?
You know, going back to what you said about respect, I think one of the things that made me most successful in that temporary position was because I respected that they felt as close a tie to the land. And I know Native Americans would differ on this, but they felt as strong a connection as Native Americans do, in a different way, and obviously very different, but to respect that they also had been there for many generations and had a very strong tie to the land, was huge in laying that foundation of trust. And let's talk about this and figure out a solution that's going to work for everybody.
I don't have a question per se, but I work for the Southwest Conservation Corps and I'm the field supervisor. But the past 2 seasons, I've had the pleasure of leading the Women's Plus Saw crew. So we've been sent all over the valley doing chainsaw projects everywhere. And most of our project partners from all these offices that you all work at have been men, and they've all been great to work with. We're really lucky with who we've worked with. But it's really cool to know that there's all this like female leadership behind it too. So I joined this just kind of on a whim, but this has been great. So thank y'all. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. That's interesting. You know, we go ahead and do, and I know this is like not completely related to what you said, but we go do a lot of school presentations, and a lot of times I'll try and go so that little girls can see, you know, that there also are women that are working in these fields, or high school young ladies or whatever, because yeah, primarily, right now, you know, out of like 15 employees, there are only 2 females in my office. So I try and make it a point to reach out.
We will say we do love Gerard and his karaoke, so but that's awesome.
Everybody loves Gerard and his karaoke.
That's so fair.
You know, Andrea, when you say that you go to the events and you want to make sure that people see that women are doing this, really resonates with me because so many years I did annual event at the Fremont County Head Start called Safety Town. And then that would always lead into additional school visits with many of the teachers. And so often the question would turn to how do you get the job that you're doing? And the younger kids would be just, you know, as wide-eyed as possible. And so many of them would say, can girls be firefighters too? And I'm like, what do you think? You know, and I make them think for just a second. And you know, I think my whole goal was to get them to really understand that you can do anything. And I'm like, we've got more women firefighters in this office than we do men right now. So yes, absolutely. And boy, you should see those little girls' eyes just light up when I say that, you know, and change. Now there are more men in that office, but you know, we expect that, right? Yeah, that's we got to have that positive reinforcement with the little ones too.
I think just one more thing to add to what you just said, Greg, is having strong women mentors. I know that's what helped me a lot. And, you know, when we have women in leadership positions like you all are, having a mentor that is someone to look up for and kind of pull you through every now and then, and someone you can call and lean on and ask questions. And that has helped me more than anything. I know there were several women in government that in, you know, leadership positions in the state and other commissioners that have been there 20, 30 years that really pulled me through my first 3 years when I got feeling beat up and things like that, and helped me develop that resiliency and develop that strength. And I think they were very important, and having that role model is key.
Yeah, I would be remiss also if I didn't mention that right now in the Rio Grande National Forest, it's really cool to have 3 female rangers. And I think, you know, we have a little bit of a different camaraderie maybe, or I don't know, but it's been really great working with Martha and Tristram so closely.
Yeah, 100%. It's really neat. I mean, and you can, it's just sort of like the sort of energy chemistry in our, and especially like leadership team meetings is just different because I mean, I think any sort of mix of male, female is, or I don't know, but just that sort of simple little box around it. But everybody brings different energy, and I think it's something to have a little bit of a center of gravity in the ranger cadre that is female. And I would imagine Greg has some things to say about that.
You know, it was interesting because when I was the ranger then on Swatch, everybody's like, oh, Dan has his hands full. He's going to be dealing with all of the, and I really pushed back on that. And I was kind of resentful about that. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter that I'm a woman. I'm a ranger. But you know, we do bring a different perspective. But ultimately at the end of the day, I'm a ranger who happens to be a woman. And it doesn't bug me anymore. Because it's everybody's used to us now.
Well, I certainly am, and I can tell you, I can't really envision my role on this forest without you 3. So that's awesome. Keep doing what you're doing.
You get the same performance evals that we do.
Oh my.
That's funny. Huh.
And I think next time if we do this again, we're gonna have to have Ramona on as a speaker too.
For sure. I think that would be really neat. I don't know what the venue is, but I mean, I'm just thinking about Ramona. I think like Heather Dutton from the water side. Carla Shriver. I mean, I think that there's some real like movers and shakers, and I think it's interesting to think about what is specific or interesting or makes for a different discussion from the perspective of being female versus just being people, but versus maybe an age thing or a where you're from thing or a who knows what it is thing. But I think it is interesting to and we maybe like think about all those different ways to dissect and group who it is who is part of kind of shaping public lands and community decision making in the valley.
Cool.
Gigi Dennis would be neat to get in here.
Yeah.
She's a powerhouse.
Yeah, and I think Ashley Valdez, maybe. She's a strong leadership from the electric company that I'm drawing a blank
Oh.
on right now.
The rural one?
No, the other one.
Oh, Excel.
Excel, thank you. Drawing a blank. It's, like I said, my brain turned off an hour ago.
Yeah.
But she's very good leadership person. And
Nice.
she's
Huh.
very personable, and I work with her on several groups, and she's good too. That's all I know. Cool. I really appreciate y'all doing this. I just kind of tuned in on a lark, so glad I did.
Yeah, so glad you did too. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to our speakers, Martha, Tristram, Andrea, and Pam. We really appreciate you taking the time after, I'm sure, a long, busy day of meetings anyways, to join us and share some of your wisdom here. And thanks for all the good questions as well. So next month for this program, for our Forest Specialist Series, we'll have Greg speaking with hopefully Adam Moore from Colorado State Forest Service. They'll be talking about wildfire preparedness as we're coming up on the summer, and May is Wildfire Preparedness Month. So we'll be right back here on Zoom, May 18th, and hope to see you there. And again, going back to our door prize winner, this month was Anne. I believe she left early, but I'm sure I can get her contact info. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and to our speakers. We hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you all.
Nice seeing everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you
Good
so
evening.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.